What is going on, YouTube? Andrew Miller, Shane Black from Hook'emHeadlines.com, the Hook'em Horn Show, coming back at y'all today with a look at some just last-minute storylines, kind of. If you haven't seen it already, Shane and I and Tarek and I have done separate early preview and in-depth previews of the Sugar Bowl. This video, we're just kind of taking a higher level look at a few individual storylines and some interesting stuff that's happening before the Sugar Bowl. Nothing like crazy breaking news or anything like that, but definitely some interesting ways to spin the depth chart. And you had media days today, yesterday. So definitely some interesting talking points there. But again, if you haven't checked out the in-depth preview yet, go check that out. I'll link that in the description below, and our early preview as well. Got some other more data-driven points and individual matchups that we looked at there between Shane and I. And so first thing, Shane, that I kind of want to talk about here today is Quinn Ewers. I think that Quinn had one of the longer media sessions today. Arch Manning had a very well followed one at that. There was a lot of media coverage just for him. I think the crowd was much bigger for him than it was for Quinn or really anyone else at media days. So, definitely got some interesting talking points there. I did an article on the site today talking about practice reports said Quinn Ewers just been playing lights out, or practicing lights out, really at any sort of simulated live game action or sort of throwing drills that Quinn has been a part of in the last few days in bowl practice this week. Also that just the staff is very confident in the offensive game plan that they've put together, which, seems obvious, but is still nice to hear so close to kickoff of the game. Just because I mentioned it in the video yesterday for the in-depth preview with Tarek, but I do think that, Texas has the matchup advantage, Texas offense versus Washington defense. Whereas I think the Washington offense versus the Texas defense is actually the best two units for each team. So, or the best unit for each team. And so, Quinn, he's an X factor in this game. He has to be solid. He looked great against Oklahoma State, obviously a record-breaking performance in the Big 12 championship game, over 450 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns. And it sounds like he remains confident that, I think there's been a few videos of his throwing drills, but also that cool video on Twitter that the Texas football page posted, Spin Ewers with that nice deep ball he threw. And, I think there's a lot of excitement surrounding what he can do for Texas to, kind of keep pace through the air with Washington. I think that's kind of the best you can do against this Washington team where, the nation's top passing offense against, I think, a vulnerable at times Texas secondary, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So as far as Quinn is concerned, the fact that, you're hearing from practice reports that there's a ton of confidence in the installation of the offensive game plan, that he's practicing lights out. It seems like there's the sort of confidence in him from not just, people around the program and in the program and sources there, but also, from Steve Sarkisian, Arch Manning, some of the other guys that have talked about Quinn, Kyle Flood as well. This is the sort of thing we kind of heard heading into the season or before the Alabama game when he was playing really well there. What are your thoughts on Quinn headed into the game on Monday?
That last thing you just said is interesting. We heard it all off season and going into the beginning of the season. This is a new Quinn Ewers. He's changed his body. He's changed his mindset. He took last year for granted. And obviously we've seen that throughout his play this year. I think that really comes to fruition in a game like the Sugar Bowl. If Quinn is really as locked in as people have said he is, which I think he is, I mean, we saw it all year, then this is a game it shows up. It showed up against Alabama. It showed up against Oklahoma State. It showed up, really against Oklahoma besides those first 5 minutes. So, the 3 biggest games of the season, Quinn has looked phenomenal. So I think we can expect him to play well once again on Monday. And I also think something to, take into consideration when you break down different matchups and where Texas has the advantage, it looks like Texas is more talented at a lot of the positions across the board. And it seems like people are just saying, Heisman finalist, Michael Penix, Washington has the better quarterback in this game. And while Michael Penix is a damn good quarterback and, those deep balls and some of those back shoulder throws are really on point. He's one of the best deep ball throwers in the country. I wouldn't count out, like, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that, number 3 goes out there and is the better quarterback on Monday.
Statistically, Quinn has been very good on the road and in neutral site games this season. Maybe forgetting the OU game where, I think he responded well after those, after 2 of the turnovers, but, he's been, like you said, he's been playing lights out otherwise. The Alabama game earlier this season, Big 12 championship game against Oklahoma State, I mentioned it earlier in the video, had a record-breaking performance there. Heading into the Sugar Bowl, it's caught my eye that he's still also having that same calm demeanor, that same even-keeled mindset where, both Sark and Quinn said, that's ultimately what he's focusing on. I think he ended one quote at media availability earlier today talking about Quinn, where he said, I don't let the highs get too high, don't let the lows get too low. And, that's going to have to be the mindset he takes into this, his first career, play college football playoff start. Like I said, I think it's important to note that confidence that is instilled in him heading into this game. Arch Manning, I guess I'll touch on him really quick before we, we'll have plenty of time this offseason to talk about Arch Manning and his development. For now, it's important that, he really talked about his mindset, not only squashing the transfer rumors, because I think that's important just to, take into the bigger picture here of his role as the backup now being one play away from being the guy, kind of in a situation like Malik Murphy was a couple of months ago, where, at any time you got to be ready. And this is the biggest of stages, not to mention right up the road from where he's from in New Orleans. And so, this game's a big deal for Arch. He talked about it today in his media availability where, it's really been about keeping a team first mentality and, really just focusing on getting himself ready and, making sure that he's right if he needs to be called into action. Sarkisian made it clear today. I think that was today. I can't remember if that was today or yesterday that he said that that Arch is the backup, that they have confidence in him. And that, he specifically referenced the Tech game where, Arch led a touchdown drive, completed a couple of passes, had some decent runs there as well. Just really showed the ability to methodically lead the offense down the field against Power 5 competition is the important part there. So he got his sea legs under him in that sense. I think that's really all I would mention about Arch is that it seems like his mindset's in the right place. He's been complimentary of Quinn and vice versa. Quinn had some nice things to say about Arch today as well, just talking about his growth and maturation within the program from what he's seen this year. So do you have anything else you would add on the Arch subject?
Yeah, well, just you brought it up about, Arch in the run game against Tech. I think one interesting thing to note, both Washington and Texas have used this last month to get healthy. I think, now you're about 10 weeks out from when Quinn suffered that shoulder injury. And especially a game of this magnitude, I could see him using his legs a little bit more, kind of like we saw against Rice, against Baylor, against Kansas earlier in the year, where especially on third down, he was willing to, in man coverage, tuck the ball and find the hole. So,
next thing I wanted to talk about, and I think this is a huge part of this game, is the matchup between, Washington's pass offense, Michael Penix, and, that tremendous Washington receiving core, guys like Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, and Jalen Polk versus Texas's secondary, group that, especially at safety, I think you could pinpoint as one of the weaker position groups performance-wise for Texas throughout the season. Texas in the first half also does not have Derek Williams, true freshman safety. I would say their best cover safety this season. It's, that's going to be something to watch. Texas to try to account for, not having Williams. Also, don't forget that Texas is down a few other scholarship safeties that have entered the portal. Jalen Catalon being the main one. So at this point, you got Michael Taff, you got Keaton Crawford, and you got Jaron Thompson. Those are the 3 scholarship safeties you have left that have been getting first and second team reps. Beyond that, Ryan Watts is someone that is cross-trained there that I don't think they're going to play him there, especially with him coming back from injury. I know that, they didn't want to push that too hard. And so I wouldn't expect him to really play there. But, there's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot on Thompson, Crawford and Taft to be able to bow up in the first half against this, the nation's leading pass offense. At corner, speaking of Watts, something interesting that I saw earlier this week was Malik Muhammad. I did an article about it at the site. He's getting the starting reps now at boundary corner. He has been in bull practice this week. Watts has been a full participant in practice. I should note that, dealing with a lower body injury down the stretch this season, and limited him in the big. Actually, he was out for the Big 12 title game. Yeah, I believe that to be correct. Yes. And so, he and Terrence Brooks been taking the starting reps at corner, and then Watson, Holmes with the second team. So, all four of those guys are going to be important, just with how much Washington likes to spread you out and air it out. Jahdae Barron obviously going to be a really critical component here as well, because he could be playing some pure cornerback role in this one, and he's I would say he's probably your best cover guy, and so. Really got to get through the first half without giving up too many big plays. Washington leads the nation in deep passing yards and deep completions this season in the Power Five. And so you got to keep them from getting over the top too much, especially with Roma Odunze. He's arguably been, I think, the best wide receiver in college football this year. I know that Marvin Harrison won the award, but Odunze has been great, 900-yard receiving games. Led the Pac-12 in receiving yards. Jelani McDonald's been getting more reps at safety. I think that's interesting, where if, you do have an injury during the game, he might be someone, especially in the first half, to watch. Texas, though, again, you just got to get through the first half. Derek Williams comes back in the second. Obviously, he's going to be a key part of the secondary in the second half. I think that there's two things here that are interesting to me. The first is that Keaton Crawford is getting the starting reps at safety. Obviously, it's well documented some of the issues he's had in pass coverage throughout his career, identifying different route concepts, things like that. I bring that up just because Washington is going to push the tempo. They like to run a lot of that intermediate deep, long developing routes where, you really got to be on it following those route concepts to prevent the play from getting behind you. I thought Texas did a good job of managing that last year against Washington in the Alamo Bowl, but this is going to be a different animal in the college football playoff. The Penix in this offense even better than they were last season. The second thing is that, I do think that Jahdae Barron could get some reps at safety. I know we've mentioned that on the show previewing the game over the last few weeks, but Barron is going to kind of be your Swiss Army knife for this game and play at all positions. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on the state of the safety position right now heading into the game, and then some of the distribution of the practice reps at corner and safety.
Yeah, well, I think this is why you spend the off season, cross training, because you never really know. You just might say, hey, we got to go with our best, 5-6 defensive backs. If that means put Jahdae Barron at safety, maybe moving Ryan Watts to safety, whatever you have to do, you got to get your best players on the field. I think, Sark and PK and, Blake Gideon confident in Michael Taft and Keaton Crawford. They both had some great moments this year. And I think Taft, if you watch him and you watch games back, he really knows what's going on the field at all times. Like, he diagnoses plays very well, especially, screen passes, things of that nature. He's calling them out before anyone else is. It's just about, getting there and making the play. And he can't really afford to, be flat-footed because he doesn't have that makeup speed. I do, and I'll pose this question to you, wonder, we talked off air, Sark pretty much every time they win the coin toss defers. How much of the Derek Williams first half suspension plays not only into a call like that, but into the game plan as well? Like, do you think Sark is going to say, all right, let's slow it down because we need to, get D Will back? I don't think it will that much. I don't really think it should. And I think Derek Williams is clearly one of your two best safeties on this team. And he's going to stay on the field for most of the second half. But I don't think you should really change anything up in regard to first half game plan, trying to get this game to the second half, if that makes any sense.
Yes, I know we talked about that off air, and I do agree that I think if you can get the ball first and you can possess the ball and really run the ball effectively, that's really going to help your defense here because then you keep those guys up front fresh. We'll talk about the defensive line in a second here, but it really keeps those guys, Devondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Alfred Collins, where they can really help the entire defense if they're fresh to be able to collapse that pocket, make Michael Penix uncomfortable, give him less time to throw, and that puts less pressure on the safeties if they're not having to cover for as long on a lot of those intermediate deeper out concepts. So there's definitely a lot of credence to that, to where obviously the more Texas can possess the ball in the first half, I think the better your chances are to be in a good spot when Derek Williams gets back in the second half and really start to be able to push toward victory, toward that line of victory in this game. I also think one interesting part, one X factor, I think, to this game is definitely Jalen Gilbo. I know he's been getting a lot of the second team reps at the star position this week. Austin Jordan getting mixed into as he's been getting back from injury. But, we talked about Barron. If he's got to move over and play somewhere else, that puts in Gilbo into a key spot where you're going to be facing a very talented Jalen McMillan more than likely out of the slot. And we've seen Gilbo get picked on at times this season, TCU especially. I think he gave up 1 or 2 touchdowns in that game in coverage. And, he has been good at times in the last 2 seasons. And I do still think he's got a lot of potential in this secondary. I think he's a very talented player, former blue chip recruit. And he's got a lot of versatility at that. But he's also suffered quite a few injury issues in the last, or he's been limited, I guess is a better way to put that, by injuries in the last 2 years. And so, it'd be nice to see him, really on such a big stage, be able to provide some quality reps at the star position. I think that would not only really help the defense, but really boost his confidence heading into the offseason, because you're bringing in Andrew Makuba, who can challenge for that starting rep, not only challenge, but it's probably the favorite to be that starting nickel next year when you lose Jahdae Barron to the NFL draft, expected to happen during the spring. But, for Gilbo, the time is now to really step up.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the point, like, get your best 5 players on the field. I think PK and Sark have to be under the mindset, like, hey, understand the moment. If what you have is not working, be adaptable and switch that up, because it's the biggest game in Texas football in 14 years. So, like, be adaptable, be willing to switch things up, try different things, and who knows. So I think there's enough talent in the secondary that they can piece it together in the first half. You get Derek Williams back, he's going to be fired up.
I was on mute there. Another guy going back to his home state to play this game, going back to the boot. Yep. And so, I think he's going to be ready to go, like you said, out of the gates in the second half.
I think the conversation around the secondary and specifically the safeties is this a game where they can make a play or two? Mm-hmm. Or is it a game where Washington just has their way for 4 quarters? Yeah. Because Washington's going to put up points. They're going to put up yards through the air. We know that's going to happen. Probably the best trio receivers in the country. No slight to what Texas are really dang good receivers. So I think can someone make a play? Just half come up with another pick. Keaton Crawford find himself under the ball like he did against Oklahoma State. Like, what can you do? Because if you make 1 or 2 big plays, that completely flips the game on its head.
All right, I think for the secondary, yes, you gotta make do with what you got for the first half, and then really start clamping down on Washington in the second half. Yeah. The last thing I really wanted to talk about in the way of storylines for this game was the defensive line for Texas. Obviously there's a ton of talking points around Devondre Sweat, Byron Murphy. Devondre Sweat winning the Outland Trophy, best interior lineman in the nation, and Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, highest graded defensive tackle. And Texas has the 2 highest graded defensive tackles in the Power 5 this season, heading into the College Football Playoff, and in Sweat and Murphy. You had the comments from Michael Penix. What was that? A few days ago, last week, about I think that was a few days ago, saying that giving them some respect, saying, they're a good D line, but it's not like they're the Niners or the Eagles. And it felt like a lot like what even if not more so, uh, a talking point that Sweat and Murphy recognized compared to what Mike Gundy said about them, where, he was before the Big 12 championship game, he was just like, they're good, but, we're going to try to block them or double team them just like we always have. And it's like, I'd said this to Tark. It's neither comment from Gundy nor Penix was as bad as what the Iowa State offensive lineman Jared Hufford said before that game in late November. But still, I don't get why people aren't just playing more gamesmanship at this point and just obviously Sweat and Murphy notice this stuff and it motivates them. These are the type of things that gets these guys ready to go. And it's, they're not Michael Jordan. I'm not saying that, but they're the best that there is in the way of defensive tackles right now in college football. So in a way, that's a valid comparison. And you don't just like saying that you don't need any additional motivation for them. Anything else is just going to make your chances to compete even that much more difficult. And so, that said, I think that Murphy and Sweat are obviously going to be ready to go. They're huge components of this game because you really need that interior pass rush presence to be able to disrupt Michael Penix's throwing motion. And, the Washington offense built around those intermediate deep route concepts, hitting that deep ball. And if Texas can force Penix to, get outside, throw on the run, disrupt his throwing motion, you're really going to help your case here because, Washington's not an offense that likes to throw just a bunch of underneath stuff or, short screen game. They don't run a whole lot of that. So I think for Texas, if you can really be very, very disruptive along the interior from the start of this game, you're going to have a great chance, to really disrupt Penix and ultimately come out of this one with a win if you can limit what Penix does. So that said, I think it's interesting to note that, they've been working with Jere Bledsoe and Aaron Bryant. There's been a few practice reports saying they're looking good is in more like that backup role as like the two guys just outside the defensive line rotation, but that, expect to see a good amount of Vernon Broughton, Alfred Collins, Trill Carter. I think each of those guys bring something to the table that can really help you in this game. Vernon Broughton, I like him just from the perspective of how he's improved as a run defender and as, he continues to excel as an interior pass rusher. I think in this game, someone that you can have that, Washington's interior offensive line isn't that big. So a guy like Broughton that doesn't have, the size of Sweat or the leverage, pad level movement that Murphy brings, he can still, he's got a good arsenal of pass rush moves. He's pretty quick off the line I think he can still cause some commotion in the pocket. Alfred Collins, we've seen him do some freakish things in the postseason before. And I think size-wise, I think his performance on the field this season, his motivation to prove himself for the NFL draft, this could be a really big game for him. And then Trill Carter, I had mentioned him in an article I did earlier this week among 3 underrated players who could get more snaps. Carter, he's actually gotten at least 20 defensive snaps in 4 consecutive games, which is the first in the last 4 games that's happened, each of the last 4 games. And that's the first time this season he's gotten that many snaps in at least 3 consecutive outings. So he's worked his way back from injury. This staff has obviously been trusting him to get back into the mix more. He's got 1 year of eligibility remaining. So he's, going to be one of these guys that could be a starter, like that first line of guys along the interior. And so, all of these 3 are going to be incredibly important to, again, still get pressure on the quarterback, be able to clog up the running lanes for when Washington does try to run downhill with Dylan Johnson, 1,000-yard rusher, really physical guy that can run downhill, outside or in, between the tackles. And so, these 3, they got to help to keep Murphy and Sweat fresh and, give some good reps. I don't know. Here's the thing. I don't know how many reps Texas is going to have to face on defense, how many snaps. Washington averages about 65 offensive plays per game, which ranks around 90th in the FBS. I think there's a misconception where they're just because they're a spread you out, an aired out offense that they run fast. That's not necessarily the case. They just generate a lot of big plays, but they try to do it in pretty methodical fashion. And so, a lot, again, so much of this game is getting the most out of this defensive line.
Higher percent of snaps that Sweat and Murphy are on the field, advantage Texas. You mentioned the guys like Alfred Collins, Trill Carter starting to play a little more as he gets healthy. They are very suitable second teamers. I mean, like very, very good second teamers, but they're no Sweat and no Murphy. So like if you can maximize those two guys' snaps, advantage Texas. So it'll be interesting cat and mouse type game. We've seen it all season with substitution patterns for Texas opponents, knowing that if they can keep, 93 on the field for 8 snaps in a row, he's not going to be as effective towards the end of the drive. So it'll be interesting to see what Washington does. They might do, a lot of that phantom no huddle where they get up to the line quickly just so you can't sub, and then they look to the sidelines and take their time. I think we could see a lot of that and catch not only the Texas defensive front, but the safeties out there as well. So it'll be interesting. I feel very confident with this group. I mean,
so interesting. Now, okay, the second part to this is that I did find interesting is from a practice report earlier this week from Horns 24/7 talking about the jack position. Some of the guys, Jamon Tapp, Justice Finkley, Barron Sorrell specifically, that worked with Bo Davis and some of the defensive tackles this week in bowl practice. That to me is interesting just from the perspective that, not only are Texas trying, you mentioned earlier, not only does Texas try to cross-train the defensive backs and have a lot of versatility there. I'm not trying to say they're going to slide these guys over to play, 3-tech, but, I think we could see some hand in the dirt stuff in this game. And I, really just, you mentioned you got to maximize every snap. You got to be really physical. But, these Washington offensive tackles are really good. And I think for Texas, they're really going to have to be able to not only collapse the pocket from the interior, but getting home on Penix can just be such a game breaker. That's a little bit outside of the scope of this, but like I found it interesting that they're getting to work with Bo Davis and just an extra motivating factor to get these guys ready to go on Monday night. For Tapp, this is I think the first game that this is gonna be the first game that he's playing back in his home state. Because we got like 3 guys that we've talked about in this video. They're all from Louisiana: Derek Williams, Arch Manning, Jamon Tapp. But Tapp was here at Texas last year, and he had a good amount of hype. I think among the edge rushers that signed with Texas in the 2022 class, wasn't he the highest rated?
I think he was, and Jamon Tapp was a guy that I mentioned in a calendar year ago. Guy who could potentially break out in the Alamo Bowl last year. It didn't turn out, but that just goes to show you that like the talent is there. People are talking about like he's a good player.
And obviously the staff has a lot of faith in him because he's still in that top group of like 4 edge rushers in that rotation. They obviously Anthony Hill has been a hybridized edge rusher and very effective at that this season. And, Sorrell and Burke are your 2 guys at the buck and the edge positions. Justice Finkley kind of being the third one where, he's been getting consistent reps game in and game out. But Jamon Tapp, he's been getting reps, down the stretch this season, somewhere in the ballpark of 5 dozen in the last 5 or 6 weeks. And so I don't think that it's out of the question that he comes through, has a big game here, because obviously the staff seeing something in him and the talent's there. It's just we haven't seen it materialize in sack production yet. And I know that, he came in as more of that, raw talent that needed to be refined a little bit. You needed to contain a lot of that athleticism, work into that, get more flexibility and bend coming off the edge, get some better like pad level approach there. And if he ever is rushing from anyway, I'm getting too deep into the technicals there, but it's a spot that I think would be really, really good to see him break out. I mentioned him among the 3 freshmen I think could break out in this game for Texas. And, if you can get sack production on Penix, and that there's no better way to do that for Texas this season for a guy like Tapp,
Yeah. And I think kind of an overarching point. I think this is why you invest so much into the football program, why you hire all those analysts, you bring on Paul Chris, is for these big games, for the times when you have whether it's the bye week throughout the year or if you're playing in the college football playoff and you have that month off, you are throwing all the cards on the table. Like it should be.
That's about all I got for this video. I mean, I know, like I said, we talked about doing we did the early preview, the in-depth preview. Definitely go check those out again. Both those will be linked in the description below. Had consistent coverage on the site. Got a few more articles coming before game day, but for the most part, got a lot of our in-depth coverage out. And, again, I'll link you all to the site in the description below. Keep up with us there. And, hoping for a good result. Texas a 4.5-point favorite before kickoff. Hopefully we got more coverage for y'all coming for a national championship game, but that, is still putting the cart too far in front of the horse. But anyway, yeah, for Shane Black, Andrew Miller, at hook'emheadlines.com, the Hook'em Horn Show. That's pretty much it. Welcome.